I saw that Tom was here this morning. I asked Tom, I said, do you want to preach on the dishonest steward? That goes for any of the rest of you. If anybody else would like to preach on this passage, you're more than welcome to. I'll sit down and listen to what you have to say. I'm a little bit aggravated by Luke. This is getting old. Luke is upsetting my apple cart. It's kind of like my pulpit's been changed a little bit back here this morning, so I'm discombobulated. That's an extension of my desk, and I can't find my stuff. But it's okay, because that's what part of what Christianity, part of what the gospel, part of what God does in our lives upsets the apple cart all the time, over and over and over again. When we think we've got it figured out, guess what? We don't. Y'all probably know that better than I do, some of you. But part of what I think is going on here is Luke is telling us not to go get a financial planner in this text. I don't think that's exactly what's being said. I do think that there's some wrestling with the idea and the possession and the understanding of wealth and what that means for our world and in our lives, and where we find our faith, how that intersects and how that touches our lives, how it touches our understanding in a way that makes a difference. This dishonest steward, as he often has become known as, realizes that because of his dishonesty, his manager is dismissing him. It's over, done. Your schemes are finished. Realizes he's not much good for anything else. Sometimes that's the way that some people talk about the call to ministry. If there's anything else in the world that you've realized that you can do, you should go and do it. And if you keep feeling that call, then you should go into ministry. It's not a first choice. It's the calling, the depth of your life and what God is doing in our lives. This manager realized he wasn't much good for anything else, not to dig ditches, not to work real hard. Physical labor wasn't his thing. So he goes to some people and he says to him, "Oh, how much do you owe?" "Oh, I owe 100. He said, "Oh, make it 80. Another 100. Make it 50. Well, now there are some commentators that say that really what was happening here was that the dishonest manager was trying to cut into his own commission, not doing his commission so that he could get a real low price for the people who owed him back. That happened once with a copier salesman person that came here to the church and represented the copier, and he says, "Oh, we're going to give you the copier." I forget what it was, $120 a month or $140 a month, something like that. And so then the next year when that guy had gone, he came back and they said, "Oh, well, it's going to be $300 a month." And I said, "Do what? You're talking about a 100% increase." This is not going to happen. They don't know me. I mean, I try to take 2 nickels, rub them together, and see if I can get 11 cents. They said, "Well, what really happened was the only thing we can figure out is that the salesman did without his commission so he could give you a low price, but we can't do that anymore." So it had to go up. But I wasn't expecting that. I thought, well, that's not what he said. He didn't tell me anything about that. Talking about dishonest, I hadn't seen that guy since. It may be good for him. Although I don't really look like very intimidating. But that wasn't what I was expecting. I don't know. Maybe that's really what happened. He had a change of heart, and he was trying to be good, and he realized that I'll do without my commission so that these people will be nice to me. Other commentators suggest that he perhaps did this cut so that whenever the people saw the person who they owed the money to, that they would say, "Oh, look how nice he is. He's such a nice person to be in debt to." Kind of respect him. Not did they loan again. They thought it was a good person to loan from. So that maybe perhaps that they would be commended and say, "Oh, well, let me go on." And then they tell him how great this manager is, and so maybe he could save his job. There's a lot of ink been spilled about this dishonest guy. Went the other night down to the Carolina Theater. Guess what was showing? The Godfather. I had never seen The Godfather. I had seen snippets on TV, but I had never sat 3 hours in front of a big screen and looked at it. I didn't know I was studying for my sermon. You know, they love The Godfather. Oh, I respect The Godfather. You know, and somebody winds up dead. Talking about some interesting shenanigans. Everybody's like, oh, he's so great, so wonderful. People wind up, you know, swimming with the fishes, as they say. But you know, that happens a lot. And you know, there's other famous criminals such as that. Al Capone, you know, Bonnie and Clyde. I mean, American history's full of them. It's pretty wild. Mom was on Ancestry.com, realized that at one time, one of my distant cousins was one of the top 10 wanted in America. Robbed banks in Asheville and all kinds of things back in the day. Yeah, I come from good stock. I don't think he was blood related. Then I look around. Oh, you can see other things. You know, I think of, when you get into this, you get thought of Andrew Carnegie. You know, he sponsors NPR. I listen to this, brought to you by the Carnegie Foundation. You know, Greensboro had a Carnegie library. You know, they sent libraries all around the country, paid for it. There was one down next to West Market Street, close by. Set up these foundations with this hordes of money. I always thought that's really cool until I learned that Carnegie underplayed his employees so that he could have a whole lot of money, because he thought he could better spend his money for them than they could spend it for themselves. Something tells me if they were like I am, you know, I'm a whole lot better at spending than I am at saving. I don't understand why the economy hadn't been stimulated. I keep spending. It keeps going. But you know, I kind of wrestle with that. I'm like, well, what? And then I think, well, you know, with CEOs and executives choosing salaries that are paid, I understand that it's common now for CEOs of companies to make 350 times more than the lowest paid employee in the company on a regular basis. Do what? That's a lot of money. They get responsibility and stuff, but multiple millions of dollars a year for salary. And some people can't afford to pay for food and shelter in our world. Oh, Andrew Carnegie, I mean, he might have set up a game. But you know, that was kind of the same thing with the Vanderbilts. I don't know, if you want to bring it home, let's talk about the Cones just a little bit. Had these huge houses here, huge houses up in the mountains, but there was a hospital. You know, still named it after them. They got plenty of money, and folks that lived over in the Milltown didn't get much. Suffered through. Beholden to the company. Oh, is this what you call a shrewd manager? I'm not sure. Think of others. I think maybe there is some good that comes from it. Bill Gates and Bill Gates Foundation. I looked that up, and they had spent across the world for health and to alleviate poverty and hunger and sickness around the world since last year. They spent $65 billion in grants since they'd set up the foundation. That's a lot of money. Do a lot of good. Still doing good. But then there are others that the masses have just escalates. It continues to just grow and grow and grow, and yet people suffer around them. I don't know. I don't know what this means. I mean, I look and I'm like, well, you know, stop by Starbucks, get a $7 cup of coffee. Collection plate goes by. I'm like, well, $1's good enough. Do what? That's nothing of the sort of what we're called as people of faith to respond to God's goodness. You have to realize that where we are in our lives, and perhaps there's a part of us that too is the dishonest steward. It's all for me and it's all for I'm going to use what I've got to do good for me, and so people will be nice to me. And yet at the same time, God over and over again extends to us undeserved, unmerited mercy and grace. To offer to love us and to care for us, claims us through the waters of baptism, nurtures us through the bread and the wine at communion, calls us into relationship with God that cares about others. Commentator says, consider the famous politicians and world leaders who lied or cheated while in office and yet continue receiving grudging respect and even outright approval because they were tough and decisive. This is an older commentary. I'm not picking. We do that. Like, our priorities and what's considered important in our lives are all askew. Some of that's a fault of our own, but not all of it. Watch TV, watching the news. You need this toothpaste. It's going to make your teeth so bright and shiny. This car will make you. This new shirt. The things that we think nurture us and sustain us and make us presentable. And yet none of that's all superficial. Body wastes away, but the soul's forever. The dishonest steward calls these people in that owe him and say, cut your bill. Cut your bill. And they're like, oh, you're so kind and gracious to us. Perhaps they're the ones that have been fooled just a little bit. What people say and what people do sometimes is on the surface very kind. But it's all in expecting a return. Oh, well, you remember I invited you to my Christmas party when we could have Christmas parties. You got to invite me back to yours. It's uneasiness. But I mean, Jesus is the one that told this story according to Luke. You know, this story isn't in any other Gospels except for verse 13. I think it is, verse 9. There's one verse that's found in the Gospel of Matthew. Otherwise, and it's associated with the parable on the mount, teaching on the mount. Blessed are, can't serve two masters, God and wealth. Okay, got it. Can't serve two masters, God and wealth. You know, I think over and over again, I mean, it's important for us to remember as people who are hearing this gospel lesson in the 21st century to remember that Luke is writing to people who are very wealthy. People are they're not writing to the people who barely getting by. These are the wealthy people. And he's saying to them, he's saying, you know, this what you're holding on to so tightly, what's so important to you, is absolutely worthless, ultimately. But now you're saying, preacher, now wait a minute. You've got to bring reality. You've got to live on the face of the planet like the rest of us. We just can't go willy-nilly and, get by. True. I think that's true. I live the same way. There's a reason I'm not a monk. I prefer not to take a vow of poverty. And y'all know I love my stuff. It reminds me all the time of time that has passed by. I see something and I think of someone. I think of where I got it. It associates my brain like that. If you don't have that gift or that curse, I'm sorry and congratulations, you're very lucky. Because I'm like, oh, I need that shirt. It reminds me of 15 years ago, and I can't wear it, but I have to hang on to it. But I think what's being said here is a reminder again, is to not let the wealth, not let what we think is important in our lives, to not grasp onto it so tightly that we lose all things else important to faith and life and love one another. You know, it's important, but it's not that important. You know, I'm always amazed at the people who, when the tornado goes through, the house catches on fire, and everything that they own is gone. And they look and they say, well, we're all here, and we're all okay, and we're going to be okay, even if we have to start over from nothing. That's awesome. I'm impressed. That's realizing what you can do and what you can't control. That's holding on to stuff, but not so tightly that you can't carry on. Become debilitated. Can't move forward, can't put one step in front of another. I think that's part of what this text is saying. Is a reminder that, yeah, it's just stuff. But the important thing is how we live our life, what we do with what we do have. To remember to keep the main thing, as Bishop Jones used to say. To remember that faith and hope and love and peace and joy, those are the things of faith. That's what we're called to do and to be and to live in the Spirit of Christ, in the way of faith. Lay aside the things that burden us, that carry us down, hold on to us too tightly. Sometimes probably what it calls us to do is to rededicate our lives and to show that God is primary principle in our life. Not out of duty, but out of gratification for God's great love and wonderful forgiveness for us, for me, for you. Not a whole lot of stuff we receive in the world comes without any strings attached. That's the love of God. Grace and mercy comes to us, and it's given to us free, without price, as we say in the baptismal creed. Well, I'm going to move on now. One commentator asked at the end of their conclusion, they said, how can wealth and power be used to serve God's purposes? In our own little way, in our own little world, what we have is our wealth and our power. How do we use them to serve God's purposes in the world and for God, in gratitude and thanksgiving for all that God has done for us? Glory, honor, and power be to the one who was, who is, and who is to come. Amen.